The chain across my boat dock was still wet with lake spray when HOA President Vanessa Pike held up a laminated notice and told me I was banned from stepping onto it. Behind her, two security contractors were fastening a red private amenity sign to the cedar gate my father had built 22 years earlier. Residents voted. "The dock belongs to Harbor Ridge now," she said, smiling as if the matter had already been settled. I kept my hands off the chain, photographed the new padlock, and asked her for the recorded instrument transferring Shoreline access. Vanessa tapped the HOA logo on the notice instead of answering. Then one contractor glanced at the brass survey disc beside the first piling and stopped drilling. The disc carried my family name and a parcel number that did not match the subdivision. I watched Vanessa fold the notice against her chest. That tiny marker did not reopen the dock, but it changed what everyone standing there understood. The HOA might have locked a structure outside its own boundary. By sunset, an elderly title clerk had called me about a shoreline deed missing from the county's digital index, and a handwritten reservation no board member had mentioned. That morning, the lake rolled beneath the dock, making the new chain scrape against cedar my father had once sanded smooth by hand. My name is Caleb Lawson. I was 49 and repaired marine engines from a workshop behind the lake house my family had owned before Harbor Ridge was built uphill. My driveway connected to the subdivision road, but my house was outside the HOA. So was every tax bill I received. I did not know whether the brass disc proved anything. I knew Vanessa had arrived with contractors, a chain, and authority printed on HOA letterhead. Before leaving, I photographed the lock serial number, fresh screw holes, orange paint marks on the pilings, and the work order number inside the truck. Neither contractor would resume drilling until Vanessa showed the HOA boundary on their site plan. At 4:12, Vanessa emailed me the access notice. It cited a resident vote, the community rules, and a waterfront map. It cited no deed. The message warned me not to remove HOA property, which meant the safest choice was to leave the chain untouched and preserve exactly what they had done. Evelyn Shaw called 15 minutes after I forwarded the parcel number to the county records office. She had retired from title work, but still helped with older files. She asked me to read the number, then went silent. The number, she explained, was indexed under the defunct Lake Arden Marina Association rather than the Lawson name. An archive card pointed to a 1978 conveyance and a separate Shoreline exhibit. She could not tell me who owned the strip without tracing every later transfer, and she warned me that an old deed alone would not locate the boundary on the ground. But one handwritten entry beside the recording reference made her ask me to come in the next morning. It read, "Dock parcel reserved to grantor." If that reservation had survived the later transfers, Harbor Ridge had not merely banned me from using my own dock. It had started rebuilding a structure on land its developer may never have owned. At 9 the next morning, I met Evelyn Shaw in the basement records room of the county administration building. She was 72, silver-haired, and precise in the way of someone who had spent a career noticing when one number did not belong beside another. On the table between us sat the archive card she had mentioned. The handwritten reservation appeared in a margin, but the card was only an index. Evelyn would not treat it as proof of ownership until we found the recorded instrument behind it. While she requested the microfilm, I laid out what I knew. My grandmother, Ruth Lawson, had once owned 18 acres along the eastern side of Lake Arden. In 1978, she sold the wooded uphill tract to the Lake Arden Marina Association, but kept the lake house, a narrow access lane, and a strip around the family dock. The Marina Association never completed its planned resort. A developer acquired the uphill acreage in 1994, and Harbor Ridge opened 2 years later. My father, Daniel, rebuilt the dock 22 years before Vanessa chained it. I had been 27, strong enough to carry cedar beams down the slope, and inexperienced enough to believe my father when he said we would finish before lunch. It took us 4 days. We drove the pilings from a borrowed work barge, replaced the gate, and mounted the brass parcel disc beside the first support. The county issued a repair permit in Daniel's name, and our insurer had listed the dock with the house ever since. The dock was more than a place to tie up my skiff. I used it to test small outboard motors after repairs and to reach customers around the lake without hauling every boat over the ridge. It also gave me deep water access when summer levels dropped. Losing it meant moving my skiff to Arden Point Marina, 12 miles away by road, and turning down work that required an immediate water test. Before Evelyn returned, an email from Vanessa appeared on my phone. Attached was a formal Harbor Ridge demand letter. It cited Article 7 of the Community Rules, a resident vote from the previous week, and a bright blue area on the 1996 subdivision plat, labeled Common Waterfront. According to the letter, the board had reclaimed the dock for resident use and would begin improvements within 10 days. I read it twice. The document never identified a deed conveying the dock parcel to Harbor Ridge. It did not explain how community rules could bind a house outside the association. Most tellingly, it described the dock as an existing HOA asset, even though the board had never insured it, repaired it, or sent me a maintenance notice. Vanessa followed the letter with a message to Harbor Ridge residents announcing a proposed community launch and 6 shared boat slips. The project would be funded by a special assessment. A rendering showed new aluminum walkways laid over the footprint of my cedar dock, with the HOA clubhouse visible uphill. In the corner, an arrow labeled Future Access pointed through my gate. That afternoon, I rented a slip at Arden Point and paid the first month in advance. I photographed the receipt, recorded the mileage, and listed 3 engine jobs I could no longer schedule efficiently. The clerk at the marina watched me place my toolbox beside the skiff and asked why I had moved from a dock visible across the cove. I told her the shortest truthful version. Someone had put a lock on it. Evelyn called just before closing. She had found why the Shoreline record disappeared from ordinary searches. The deed had been filmed under the Marina Association's name, while the separate exhibit was indexed by parcel number. Neither entry had been connected to the Lawson family when the county converted its records to a digital system. She invited me back to the viewing room and threaded a gray reel through an old reader. Lines of type sharpened on the glass, grantor, grantee, recording date, and a reference to Shoreline Exhibit B. The image was faint, but the recording stamp was clear. June 16, 1978. Evelyn advanced one more frame. A legal description filled the screen, followed by the beginning of a reservation clause. Before either of us interpreted it, she pointed to the book and page number and told me the next step was obtaining a certified copy and tracing every transfer that came after it. The map Vanessa trusted was from 1996. The document glowing in front of us had been recorded 18 years earlier. The certified copy arrived 3 days later in a cream envelope sealed by the recorder's office. Evelyn opened it beneath a document camera while I sat beside Nora Bell, a title examiner recommended by my insurance agent. The deed confirmed what the archive card had only summarized. Ruth Lawson had conveyed the uphill acreage to the Lake Arden Marina Association, then expressly reserved the 36-foot shoreline strip identified in Exhibit B. The 5 words on the card appeared in the recorded document exactly as written. Dock parcel reserved to grantor. Nora did not celebrate. She drew 3 columns on a legal pad: ownership, location, and notice. The deed addressed the first column only if every later transfer carried the reserved parcel forward. The exhibit might address location, but only a licensed surveyor could relate its bearings and monuments to the land. Nothing we had yet proved what Vanessa or the current board knew before they installed the chain. We spent the afternoon following Ruth's title through 48 years of records. A 1992 distribution deed transferred the lake house, access lane, and shoreline reservation from Ruth's estate to my father. A recorded estate deed transferred the same property to me in 2018. The tax office had assigned the shoreline strip its own parcel suffix, which explained the extra number on the brass disc. Nora found no deed from Ruth, my father, or me conveying that strip to the Marina Association, the developer, or Harbor Ridge. She also found county tax maps from 1986 and 1991 showing the parcel suffix as a separate unshaded strip. They were not title evidence, but they supported consistent administrative treatment before Harbor Ridge existed at all. The developer's 1994 deed made the problem clearer. It transferred only the property the Marina Association had acquired in 1978, subject to recorded exceptions. The 1996 plat shaded the waterfront in blue, but its boundary table stopped at the uphill edge of the reserved strip. Somewhere between the survey data and the colored presentation map, the blue shading had continued downhill across land outside the subdivision. A plat can describe what was subdivided, Nora said. It cannot give the developer land the developer never received. That sentence was encouraging, but she still marked the file preliminary. A court would want the description located on the ground, and Harbor Ridge could challenge the meaning of the monuments or the effect of later shoreline changes. Marcus Reed met me at the property the following Monday. He was a licensed boundary surveyor in his early 50s who wore faded work boots and carried more patience than conversation. He began at the county control point near the subdivision entrance, not at the dock. From there, he ran measurements down the access lane and compared them with the bearings in Exhibit B. The brass disc beside the dock helped identify the parcel, but Marcus would not rely on it because my father had remounted it during the rebuild. The stronger evidence was a half-inch iron pin described in the 1978 exhibit. After clearing leaves and juniper roots near the lower corner of my lot, Marcus found metal with his locator and exposed the pin without moving it. Its position matched the deed call within ordinary field tolerance. Over 2 days, he tied that pin to a second monument, measured the 36-foot strip, and documented the current waterline. His preliminary field plot placed the cedar gate, every standing piling, and the full dock connection inside the reserved Lawson parcel. The nearest HOA boundary was roughly 11 feet uphill from the gate. Marcus cautioned me that his field work was not a judicial ruling. He still needed to review the older surveys, calculate closure, and prepare a signed certification. But the physical evidence no longer resembled Vanessa's map. Her blue common area crossed a boundary her own plat measurements did not cross. Nora sent the certified deed and title chain to Leah Morgan, a property attorney in the next county. Leah reviewed them with Marcus's preliminary plot, my photographs, Vanessa's notices, and the contractor work order. That evening, she sent Harbor Ridge a preservation and cease and desist letter. It demanded that the board maintain the lock, signs, emails, meeting records, and contractor instructions as evidence, while immediately suspending physical work on the dock. Vanessa responded the next morning. She called our interpretation historically interesting but legally irrelevant, and said the resident vote authorized the project to continue. She attached the same colored map. I forwarded her response to Leah and drove to Arden Point for my skiff. By the time I returned, a Blue Water Dockworks supervisor had sent me a copy of an email bearing Vanessa's name. It instructed the crew to resume piling removal on Thursday, despite receiving our attorney's letter. Thursday was 48 hours away. The Blue Water trucks arrived at 6:38 Thursday morning, before the mist had lifted from the lake. I saw their amber lights through my kitchen window and started recording before I walked outside. 4 workers carried tools down the slope. The chain remained across the gate, but someone had moved the private amenity sign to the center of it, as if making the claim larger could make it more accurate. I stayed on my side of the access lane and asked for the supervisor. A foreman named Curtis Lane showed me a revised work order authorizing removal of 4 pilings and installation of temporary steel supports. Vanessa's Tuesday email was attached. Curtis had also received Leah's cease and desist letter, but he said Blue Water's office had been told the boundary dispute was resolved. It was not his job to decide ownership, and I did not ask him to. I sent Leah a photograph of the work order while the crew positioned its barge. She called Blue Water's general counsel and followed with the certified deed, Nora's title summary, Marcus's preliminary field plot, and our preservation notice. By then, the crew had pulled 1 weathered piling and loosened a second. The cedar deck shuddered each time the hydraulic extractor lifted. I filmed from the bank, keeping the date, gate, barge, and work order number in the same frame. When the second piling came free, Curtis received a call. He raised one hand, and every worker stopped. Blue Water suspended the project pending written proof of ownership from Harbor Ridge. Curtis photographed the holes, secured the deck with temporary braces, and gave me the company's incident number. He would not surrender the HOA's original work instructions without authorization, but he confirmed that the lock, sign, piling removal, and proposed aluminum conversion All came from separate board-approved orders. Vanessa responded before noon. She sent Harbor Ridge residents a message accusing an adjacent property owner of obstructing a properly approved safety renovation. She wrote that the old dock was unstable, that delays would increase costs, and that the board was defending a waterfront amenity residents had funded for years. The message did not name me, but it included a photograph of my gate. 2 neighbors emailed me apologies, while 3 others demanded I release the dock. The division showed Vanessa's message had worked, at least for that day. Her argument was not entirely invented. The outer pilings were aging, and Harbor Ridge had paid a landscaping company to clear weeds along the public shoreline path above my parcel. Some residents probably believed that work extended to the dock. What Vanessa omitted was that my insurance and repair records showed my family had maintained the structure. She also omitted the deed, the survey work, and the fact that Blue Water had stopped because the HOA could not document title. The next day, I received a notice imposing a $200 daily access penalty if I entered the restricted construction zone. Leah replied that Harbor Ridge had identified no covenant binding my property and no recorded right allowing it to exclude me. She instructed me to avoid the unstable section until Marcus and a dock engineer could inspect it, but she made clear that caution was not consent. The practical damage accumulated quickly. Arden Point charged me for the slip, trailer storage, and after-hours access. Driving around the lake added 24 miles to every water test. I postponed 2 engine jobs and lost a third when a customer could not wait. At night, the empty spaces where the pilings had stood knocked dark water against the temporary braces. Marcus returned after reviewing 2 historical surveys. He completed his closure calculations, tied the iron pin to a second recorded monument, and signed a certified survey showing the 36-foot shoreline parcel. His stakes ran across the slope 11 feet below Harbor Ridge's nearest boundary. The dock gate and removed pilings sat entirely on my side. A hard rain that weekend washed loose soil down the equipment tracks. When the sky cleared, I photographed ruts beside the gate, exposed cedar roots, and muddy runoff spreading across the lower bank. A dock engineer estimated the temporary stabilization and restoration costs. Nothing had collapsed, but leaving the structure open through another storm would increase the risk. Blue Water's counsel then released invoices and email instructions in response to Leah's preservation request. The records identified Harbor Ridge as the customer for the padlock, red sign, piling extraction, aluminum walkways, and 6-slip community layout. One invoice referenced a board project code that matched the special assessment Vanessa had announced. Leah and I attended the next board meeting by video. Vanessa repeated that the 1996 plat controlled the waterfront. Elaine Foster, the board treasurer, asked a simple question. If Harbor Ridge owned the dock, where was the deed by which it acquired the land beneath it? Vanessa said the association's attorney had reviewed the issue years earlier. When Elaine asked to see that review, Vanessa moved the meeting into executive session and ended the public feed. The following morning, Elaine contacted Leah through her own attorney. She did not provide confidential documents, but she confirmed that the board's archived files contained a 2019 memorandum about the Lawson Shoreline Reservation. Leah requested the file formally. Vanessa refused, calling it privileged and unrelated. That refusal did not tell us what the memorandum said. It told us exactly which record we needed next. Leah filed the complaint 12 days after Blue Water stopped work. It asked the court to declare ownership of the shoreline parcel, confirm the surveyed boundary, restrain Harbor Ridge from interfering with my access, and require restoration of the dock. Separate counts sought compensation for physical damage and documented loss of use. Leah did not ask the judge to accept the archive deed by itself. The filing attached the certified recording, Nora's title chain, Marcus's survey, photographs, contractor records, and the notices Vanessa had sent after learning of the dispute. Harbor Ridge was served the following morning. Its insurer appointed defense counsel, and the association filed a response 2 weeks later. The HOA argued that the 1996 plat depicted the waterfront as common property, that Harbor Ridge had maintained the surrounding shoreline for years, and that residents had relied on the dock area as part of the community landscape. It also questioned whether the 1978 reservation remained identifiable after decades of changing water levels. Those arguments were more serious than Vanessa's emails. A colored map could be wrong without every person relying on it acting dishonestly. Landscaping near the parcel could create genuine confusion. Shoreline movement could complicate a description tied only to water. But Exhibit B was tied to 2 land monuments, not merely the edge of the lake, and the HOA still identified no conveyance through which it acquired the reserved strip. The temporary relief hearing took place 5 weeks after the chain appeared. The new padlock rested on the evidence table beside certified copies of the deed and plat. Nora explained each recorded transfer from Ruth's 1978 reservation through my father's estate and into my name. She emphasized the limits of her opinion. She had examined title records, not surveyed the ground. Marcus handled location. Using enlarged field notes, he showed how he began at a county control point, recovered the iron pin named in Exhibit B, tied it to a second monument, and calculated the deed closure. He explained why my father's remounted brass disc was useful for identification but not controlling evidence. The 36-foot strip on his signed survey placed the dock gate and both removed pilings below Harbor Ridge's boundary. The HOA's survey consultant did not claim Harbor Ridge held a deed. He argued that older records left uncertainty about the precise historic waterline and requested more field review. Under questioning, however, he agreed that the 2 land monuments could be located and that Vanessa's blue presentation map did not match the boundary table printed on the recorded plat. The judge made clear that the hearing would not finally decide title. The question was whether access restrictions and construction should continue while the case proceeded. Harbor Ridge was ordered to remove its chain and sign, suspend its penalties, preserve all project records, and perform no additional dock work. I was permitted to stabilize and use the structure after an engineer confirmed it was safe, with all final cost claims reserved for later. When I returned home, a Blue Water supervisor removed the red sign and opened the padlock while Leah photographed the process. The gate bore fresh screw scars, 2 pilings were gone, and temporary braces occupied the space where I normally tied my skiff. Access had been restored, but restoration had not. Discovery began with document requests, written questions, and depositions scheduled over the next 3 months. Harbor Ridge produced landscaping invoices, old community newsletters, special assessment records, and thousands of emails. Most showed ordinary board business. A smaller group revealed how quickly the dock project had moved after Vanessa proposed it as a way to raise waterfront values and add a visible amenity without purchasing new land. During his deposition, Curtis confirmed Vanessa personally approved the site plan and told Blue Water the Lawson claim had been cleared by council. He kept the instruction because it contradicted the preservation letter already in his file. His testimony connected the disputed work directly to the board's written authorization. The 2019 memorandum appeared on the HOA's privilege log. Harbor Ridge initially withheld it, but Leah learned that Vanessa had circulated copies outside the board to an amenities consultant and the developer's former sales advisor. The court reviewed the dispute privately and ordered production of the broadly shared business memorandum and its title attachments, while allowing genuinely confidential legal passages to remain redacted. The unredacted portions were enough. The memorandum cited Ruth's reservation by book and page. Its attached title note warned that the Marina Association had never acquired the Lawson Shoreline parcel. The recommended approach was to negotiate for an easement or purchase rather than represent the dock as existing common property. Email records showed Vanessa received that file before presenting the 6-slip project. In a message to 2 directors, she described the reservation as an indexing technicality that would disappear once the board approved the updated waterfront plan. Elaine Foster replied that a vote could approve spending, not manufacture ownership. Another director asked for a new title opinion. No new opinion had been obtained. Residents learned the basic facts when the board disclosed that special assessment funds were paying for the paused project and legal defense. Vanessa insisted the association still had a reliance argument, but support inside the board weakened. 2 directors authorized defense counsel to explore mediation. Harbor Ridge proposed a settlement conference, yet its opening position required me to grant residents permanent access across the shoreline strip. Vanessa was prepared to remove the lock only if the HOA kept the dock. Leah closed the proposal and placed it back in its envelope. Mediation was scheduled for the following month, but the central question had not changed. Would Harbor Ridge recognize the boundary or force the evidence into a final hearing? Mediation began in a conference room overlooking a parking garage, not the lake both sides had spent months arguing about. Leah and I occupied one room. Vanessa, 3 directors, the HOA's insurer, and defense counsel used another. The mediator carried proposals between us for nearly 6 hours. I was willing to settle without a trial if Harbor Ridge recorded the correct boundary, restored the dock, reimbursed documented losses, and accepted a permanent restriction against future interference. The HOA's first proposal offered repairs, but required me to grant an easement, allowing residents to cross my shoreline and use the dock on weekends. Its second proposal narrowed the hours. Its third replaced guaranteed access with a board-controlled reservation system. The wording changed. The demand did not. Vanessa still wanted the amenity pictured in her rendering. I declined. Leah explained that compensation could be negotiated, but ownership was not a scheduling problem. The mediator ended the session without agreement, and the court set a focused evidentiary hearing for title, boundary location, permanent relief, and damages. By then, 11 months had passed since the chain appeared. The courtroom evidence table held no single page capable of winning the case by itself. It held a sequence: the 1978 deed and Exhibit B, probate transfers, the developer's deed, the recorded plat, historical tax references, Marcus's certified survey, contractor instructions, photographs, invoices, and the produced portions of the 2019 memorandum. Harbor Ridge presented its case first. Its former maintenance contractor testified that crews had cleared brush, collected litter, and repaired path edging near the water for more than a decade. Residents described believing that the entire shoreline below the clubhouse was common property. The defense survey consultant repeated that fluctuating water levels complicated the old description. Counsel argued that the plat, maintenance history, and long community reliance should weigh against excluding residents from the dock area. Leah did not deny that people had relied on the blue map. She separated reliance from title. On cross-examination, the maintenance contractor marked every location where his crews had worked. All were on the public path uphill from Marcus's boundary. He had never repaired the cedar gate, replaced a dock board, insured the structure, or received a key from my family. His invoices used the phrase shoreline path, not Lawson dock. The defense survey consultant agreed that changing water could matter where a deed used only the water line. Exhibit B did not. Its bearings began at the recovered iron pin and tied to a second land monument. He disagreed with one minor measurement near the current bank, but even his alternate calculation left the gate and dock connection outside the HOA parcel. Evelyn authenticated the archive process. She explained how the 1978 deed had been filmed under the Marina Association's name and how the separate exhibit had remained disconnected when the county created its digital index. The record had not been newly created or secretly inserted. It had stayed in the same recorded book for decades, visible to anyone who searched the parcel number and followed the cross-reference. Nora then walked through the chain of title. Ruth reserved the strip before the Marina Association acquired the uphill acreage. Ruth's estate transferred it to my father, and his estate transferred it to me. The Marina Association's later deed to the developer could convey only what the association owned. No recorded instrument placed the shoreline strip in the developer or Harbor Ridge. Marcus used the court's display to overlay 3 separate images: the deed geometry, the measurement table from the recorded plat, and his field survey. Those 3 aligned at the uphill boundary. Vanessa's colored presentation map did not. Its blue shading simply continued past the measured line and over the dock. Curtis Lane identified the work orders. Vanessa had authorized the padlock, sign, piling extraction, and aluminum conversion. He confirmed that she instructed Blue Water to resume after Leah's preservation letter because she said counsel had cleared the title issue. No clearance opinion appeared in the produced records. The 2019 memorandum completed the question of notice. Its title attachment cited the Lawson reservation by book and page and recommended negotiating for an easement or purchase. Vanessa's email calling the problem an indexing technicality showed she had received that warning before the board approved construction. During a recess, the judge asked counsel to address why the 1996 plat should establish ownership when its own measurement table stopped uphill and the developer's deed excluded prior reservations. He did not announce a final ruling, but the question changed the atmosphere. The HOA's insurer requested another settlement session before testimony moved to the disputed amount of damages. For the first time, the board's position was being measured against documents, rather than repeated, until residents accepted it as truth. This time, Elaine Foster and the other directors negotiated without Vanessa controlling every response. Harbor Ridge withdrew its demand for dock access. The parties agreed to a consent judgment confirming my title to the 36-foot shoreline parcel and adopting Marcus's survey as the recorded boundary exhibit. A permanent injunction prohibited the HOA, its contractors, and future boards from locking the gate, entering the parcel for association projects, or representing the dock as a common amenity without a later written agreement from the owner. The financial terms totaled $47,300. That included $13,800 for gate, piling, bank, and cedar deck restoration, $6,200 for the survey and title examination, $7,300 for marina charges, additional travel, and documented loss of use, and a negotiated $20,000 contribution toward legal expenses. The settlement did not pretend every hour or inconvenience had a price. It covered amounts we could support with records and ended the risk of further litigation. Harbor Ridge also agreed to withdraw every access penalty, remove the project rendering from its materials, and record a corrective notice linking the 1996 plat to the earlier Shoreline reservation. Blue Water would perform restoration under an engineer's plan, but the HOA would have no ownership claim over the finished structure. The judge reviewed the terms, confirmed that all parties understood them, and entered the consent judgment. The cut padlock and red sign remained marked as exhibits, but they no longer controlled anything outside the evidence file. An association disclosure later placed Harbor Ridge's own legal, survey, consulting, and mediation expenses at just under $60,000, separate from the settlement. Residents had not lost that money because an old deed suddenly appeared. They lost it because the board kept spending after the deed. Title chain, survey, and prior warning all pointed in the same direction. Outside the courthouse, Leah handed me a certified copy of the judgment. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired enough to notice how light the envelope was compared with the 11 months it represented. The next morning, Blue Water returned to my shoreline, not to take the dock apart, but to rebuild what its earlier orders had damaged. Blue Water worked from an engineer's restoration plan rather than Vanessa's rendering. The crew replaced the two missing pilings, reinforced the cedar deck, repaired the gate, and filled the equipment ruts with compacted soil before resetting the bank vegetation. Curtis Lane supervised the work himself. He did not apologize for following the first order, and I did not ask him to. This time, every task ended at the boundary Marcus had marked. When finished, the dock sat level again, its repaired edge following the original cedar line. The red private amenity sign never returned. I kept the scarred section of cedar where its screws had bitten into the gate, not as a trophy, but because replacing sound wood would have erased part of what my father built. A small repair plate covered the holes. The new hardware carried no chain. The county recorder accepted the consent judgment, Marcus's survey, and the corrective notice linking Harbor Ridge's plat to the 1978 reservation. The digital map was later updated to show the 36-foot Lawson strip separately from the common waterfront. Evelyn called when the change appeared on the public terminal. She reminded me that the online line remained a reference, not the source of title. After everything that had happened, neither of us needed that lesson repeated. Harbor Ridge paid the $47,300 settlement within the required period. The marina charges, survey invoices, title examination, restoration work, and part of my legal expense stopped occupying separate folders on my workbench. I returned my rented slip at Arden Point, and drove the familiar 12 miles home with my skiff behind the truck. The association's next financial disclosure listed the failed dock project, defense costs, and settlement separately. Residents saw how much had been spent after the board received contrary title information. Elaine Foster became interim president when Vanessa resigned. The remaining directors adopted a rule requiring a current title review before approving any project outside Harbor Ridge's clearly recorded parcel. I watched those changes from a distance. Vanessa's resignation did not replace 11 months of lost time, and humiliating her would not strengthen my deed. The useful consequence was simpler. The next board would have fewer excuses to confuse a colored map with ownership. On the first clear morning after the repairs passed inspection, I carried my toolbox through the open cedar gate. The brass disc beside the first piling had been cleaned and reset without changing its position. I added a small plaque bearing the original parcel number, then lowered my skiff into water deep enough to reflect the whole dock. The engine caught on the second turn. I eased away from shore and looked back at the gate my father and I had built 22 years earlier. No chain crossed it. No sign claimed it. Behind the cedar posts, Marcus's boundary stakes stood quietly beneath the trees. An old deed had helped me recover the dock, but the deed had never acted alone. It took an archive reference, an unbroken title chain, physical monuments, a certified survey, contractor records, and the patience to let each fact support the next. If an association has ever claimed control over property you believed was yours, share what document finally clarified the truth.